So it can be horrible crashing your drone, either losing it or just having a crash and having to contact DJI Care Refresh. I'm going to do my best in today's video to help stop that happening to you, because if you have a checklist, it is possible to go for 2, 3, 4 years flying without any crashes. So I'll share with you guys some of my experiences, some of the things that I've done wrong when I was a beginner, some of the things I've done wrong more recently, having flown drones for a while now, and hopefully that'll help you never crash your drone. The first time I ever crashed a drone, and the only time I've ever written a drone off, was with the Mavic Air original. Now, I made a couple of mistakes with this. The first one was the GPS signal wasn't strong enough. Fortunately, the more recent drones are much better at capturing a GPS signal, but you still want to make sure in the top right corner that you've got a sat signal of at least 15. So I set my Mavic Air off near water, and then I could still control the drone, but when it was hovering, it would drift. And as I was landing the drone, and then shot off at a funny angle, it was too late for me to change anything, and it wasn't far away from me, but it went straight into the water, and it had the damage.
So in some ways, because we're so used to getting a GPS signal, we need to be extra careful on every flight. Check in the top right corner, see how many sats there are. There need to be at least 15 to have a safe flight. Also be a little bit careful at night, because I noticed once when I was doing this shoot in Chester, as the drone was landing, just at the last minute it drifted off a little bit.
So the next thing, guys, is to make sure that you've scouted the area first before you set the drone off. You want to make sure for no power lines, or you at least know where they are so you can avoid that area, because on your screen it's going to be very difficult to pick those up. Also, look out for seagulls. Now, this can be incredibly annoying if you're filming at beaches, promenade, because they can be nasty little creatures that go for your drone, particularly if they've got a baby seagull going around. So what I would advise with this is just keep an eye on where they are, and then I generally fly a bit higher to get out of their way. They can go for your drone, they don't care for their own safety because they want to protect their babies. And I'd also avoid setting them off from areas where people feed them, because again, they can get very territorial there. The other thing to do with making sure the area is make sure you've got an open space above you, especially when you're a beginner. Now, it's easy to set your drone off, fly it low and fly it away. But remember, if you have a return to home, the drone is going to come high directly above you. And particularly if you're low on battery, this could be very stressful, figuring out where exactly the drone is, if it's going to hit any trees above you. And you might have to do a maneuver, which for an experienced pilot isn't going to be a problem. But I think when you're first starting out, it isn't worth taking that risk. So the next problem is to do with the return to home. And you have to be very careful when you set your drone off. You might fly it for a long distance, then lower the altitude, and then if you fly it a little bit further, you might lose a signal. The drone then tries to set off, and it's not going to know there could be a tree above it. So be very careful about lowering the altitude the further away you get. So the next problem, guys, is to do with the wind. Now, I feel particularly with the mini drones, sometimes it's best just not to go out when it's too windy. You can use UAV Forecast, it's a free app, or Altitude Angel. Plan out when you're going to shoot. And if you do fly in windy conditions, you're probably best off with a drone such as the Mavic Air 2 or the Air 2S. That said, sometimes you do fly your drone up and you get caught in a higher altitude. So first, 2 things to do, and I didn't know about this, and I got myself in trouble when I was a beginner with this. If you lower the altitude, it's generally not going to be as windy when you bring it down. Secondly, this sounds obvious, but I was a stupid beginner. Make sure you have muscle memory where that sport mode is. I was panicking. I generally didn't use sport mode, so I was looking at the screen. Where is it? I was going through all the settings. No, I don't want to change the white balance. I want the sport mode. I just couldn't find it anywhere. So make sure you've got that muscle memory.
The next problem, and I've seen this a few times, is the drone getting confused when it's flying low to water, because the obstacle avoidance can mistake the water for reflections and just think it's the sky. Also with tall buildings, skyscrapers, the drone might just think that's the sky. So be very careful in those situations. And also, you need to be careful to remind yourself that if you finish the previous flight in sport mode, what I'm doing now is keeping a little sticker on my ND filters just to give me that prompt to check you're in normal mode. I did fly once recently around Chester and then did the whole flight, everything was fine, I kept it in sight, but then I turned it back and I was like, I didn't realise it was in sport mode. So sometimes the more you fly, there's a little bit danger of getting slightly, oh, I know what I'm doing, and you need to keep reminding yourself of all these little basic things.
So the next issue, and I see this a lot in my comments, is people forgetting that the drone doesn't have sideways obstacle avoidance. I feel like we watch the marketing adverts from DJI and the technology is amazing, but it can make you a little bit complacent and think that your drone's indestructible. So always remember, guys, that you might just be setting a shot up, you clip a tree branch. Always remember about sideways obstacle avoidance. Check where you are from side to side. Be very careful. All it takes is a little twig and your drone can go down. So the next thing, and I nearly had a disaster with this myself, is when you're out flying with your friend with your drone. You would think, what are the chances that your drones are going to hit? But remember, you're both going to have those creative brain cells working and both thinking what is the best shot. There is a chance that your drones are going to be very close to each other, and we were so close, as you can see from this clip, to colliding. So the best thing, if you're flying out with your friend, ideally don't fly at the same time, but at least know which altitude you're at, speak to each other, make sure you know where you are, and then you can navigate. Now, there's always a risk that someone that isn't your friend is flying the drone. Again, you just have to keep an eye out for it, and there's always some element of risk of drone flying, but I do think this is one of a sort of 1 in 5,000 chance. So yeah, you always have to do your best, keep an eye out. Recently I saw a guy flying his avatar, so I went up to him, found out where he was, and then everything's fine. The next issue, guys, is to do with when you're flying around a football stadium. You need to be very careful because the drone, it might let you fly in certain areas, but then when you get to the football stadium, it'll stop. So your risk is that you try and do an orbit around the stadium. You then lose the signal and the drone will refuse to come back to return to home because the stadium's in your way. So be very careful with football stadiums. And also don't fly like an idiot during the games like some people do, because that's just going to ruin the whole drone hobby for everyone. Okay, so the next issue, guys, is just to make sure that you're familiar with how long your drone takes to come back to you with the return to home. Always give yourself some spare battery. It's not worth taking the risk. These mini drones in particular, they've got a long amount of battery. If you're risking it, maybe you haven't bought enough batteries. It's best to I try and keep it at about 30%, then bring it back to home. And if the wind's strong, then even longer. Just better to be on the safe side. The final issue, guys, is just to make sure, and I had a little crash with this recently, is remember when you stop on the controller, your drone still can move a little bit after that. I was flying in a little forest, I was doing side-to-side motions, and because I've smoothed out my settings, that means the drone moves a little bit more than I was expecting. So make sure you're familiar with this. Do it in wide open spaces before you do it in forests, that sort of environment. Fortunately, my drone was okay, but if it had been on a road or something, then it'd probably be end of game. So guys, I hope these tips have helped you and helped keep your drone safe. Don't let it put you off. As long as you follow this, I think you've got a fantastic chance of not ever have any crashes. You can go for a long time with no problems, but I think prevention is better than the cure. And yeah, keep an eye on my latest posts. I've got some color grading videos coming up to help you with some more creative things. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.